The sun was merciless. Every direction looked the same, an endless sea of golden sand with no sign of shelter, no hint of civilization. A lone traveler, not a Muslim, wandered through the desert with nothing but silence and fear echoing in his heart. He had lost direction, both physically and in life. The desert wasn't just a place on a map now, it was a reflection of his inner state. Dry, confused, and to the cliffs empty. With each step, his body weakened, but something deeper was beginning to stir within him. Something he couldn't explain. He had always dismissed religion. For him, faith was a crutch, and God was just an ancient story. But in this vast, unforgiving landscape, he felt smaller than he had ever felt in his life. He looked up, not expecting an answer, but just because it felt like the only place left to look. That's when it happened. As the wind blew across the dunes, carried by nothing but divine will, a sound drifted through the air, a voice, melodic, soulful, echoing. It wasn't music, yet it stirred him. It wasn't a language he understood, yet it spoke directly to his soul. It was the Adhan, the Muslim call to prayer. He froze. Everything else disappeared. The heat, the thirst, the fear. All he could feel was the weight of those words. The voice called with no force, no command, only invitation. It was as if someone was calling him home, not to a house, but to something deeper, something eternal. His heart started beating differently. He didn't know what the words meant, but for the first time in years, he felt peace, a sense of presence, as if someone had found him in his lostness. Tears welled up in his eyes, unexpected and uncontrollable. This wasn't about religion anymore. This wasn't about beliefs or names or rituals. It was about the truth behind the sound. A call that didn't just reach the ears, but went straight to the heart. A call that reminded him he wasn't alone. The Adhan ended, silence returned, but he was not the same. What followed was a journey not marked by footsteps in the sand, but by a softening of the soul. The man who once scoffed at the idea of God now found himself yearning to know more. Who was this God that Muslims prayed to 5 times a day? What kind of faith calls people with such beauty, even in the middle of nowhere? What kind of love reaches out even to the one who never asked for it? He didn't find water that day, but he found something far more rare, a spark of faith. A thirst he never knew he had was awakened. The desert didn't take his life, it gave him a new one. All through a single, soul-shaking moment of hearing the Adhan. Sometimes you don't need a miracle, just a voice, just a call, just one moment that breaks through the noise of the world and touches something deeper inside you. That was his moment, and in that moment, the desert turned into the most sacred place he had ever known. He wandered under the scorching sun with no sense of direction, no map, and no hope of being found. The sand beneath his feet burned, and the sky above offered no mercy. A non-Passan man, lost in the middle of the desert, carrying only survival instincts and a heart hardened by life's disappointments. Faith was never part of his journey. In fact, religion always felt distant, something for others, never for him. But as his legs grew weak and thirst parched his throat, something within him began to shift. It wasn't just physical exhaustion. It was the loneliness of being lost not only on earth, but in life. He was empty in more ways than one. Then came a sound, faint at first, almost like a breeze humming through the dunes, but it grew clearer with every heartbeat. A voice, calm, melodious, echoing across the desert. He stopped in his tracks. What was this? Who was calling? The words were foreign, but the feeling was not. Something inside him stirred. He didn't understand the language, but the tone wrapped around his heart like a warm hand pulling him from darkness. It was the Adhan the Muslim call to prayer. He had never heard anything like it before. It wasn't just a call, it was a message. It felt as if someone knew where he was and was reaching out to him. As the words flowed, tears filled his eyes. He didn't know why. The sound touched something deep within him, a part he thought no longer existed. For the first time in his life, he felt seen, not by people, but by something far greater. He felt purpose. He felt presence. And most of all, he felt peace. The call ended, but its echo stayed within him. That moment changed everything. He may have still been lost in the desert, but his soul had found direction. A man who once mocked faith now longed to understand it. That one moment, that sacred sound, planted a seed of belief in a heart that had never asked for it, but desperately needed it. After hearing the Adhan echo through the vast emptiness of the desert, something shifted deep inside him. The sound refused to leave his mind, playing on repeat like a melody etched into his memory. He had walked miles with no food and barely any water, but in that moment, he wasn't thinking about survival. He was thinking about meaning. How could a simple call to prayer, in a language he didn't understand, calm him more than any comforting word ever had? He had experienced beauty before, art, music, nature, but this was different. This was spiritual. It wasn't designed to entertain, it was meant to awaken. And awaken him, it did. The sun began to set, and the once golden desert was now bathed in hues of red and purple. He found a small rock to sit on, breathing slowly, letting the cool wind brush against his face. As darkness approached, he saw a small structure in the distance. He followed his instincts and walked toward it, hoping it was shelter. As he got closer, he realized it was a mosque, simple, silent, yet somehow glowing with an inner light. There were no crowds, no loudspeakers now, just peace. A man stood outside and noticed him. Without asking any questions, he welcomed him in and offered him water. He drank slowly, not just to quench his thirst, but to savor the kindness. The man who gave him water smiled and said, "You're safe here. No preaching, no questions, no pressure, just presence." Inside, a few others were seated quietly, praying. Their movements were graceful, unified, purposeful. It wasn't just a ritual, it was a conversation. And though he didn't understand what they were saying, their sincerity spoke louder than words. He didn't ask to pray. He didn't even ask to learn, but his heart did. And in that moment, sitting quietly in the corner of a mosque in the middle of the desert, he felt like he belonged. Not because someone convinced him, but because the silence answered questions he never knew he had. What he once saw as foreign, he now saw as familiar. The journey that began with fear was slowly being replaced by something far greater: faith. He stayed in that small mosque longer than he thought he would. Time didn't feel the same anymore. Each second passed not with anxiety or fear, but with a strange sense of healing. He watched the men around him perform ablution, washing their hands, face, arms, and feet with quiet reverence. There was something humbling about it. Not just the act itself, but the intention behind it. It wasn't about physical cleanliness alone. It was preparation. A way to meet the divine with purity and respect. And for someone who had always rushed through life without pause, this gentle rhythm was both foreign and fascinating. He asked the man who welcomed him earlier, "Why do they wash like this?" The man didn't launch into a sermon. He simply said, "Before we stand in front of God, we clean ourselves to remind the soul that it's not just the body that needs washing. It's the heart too." That sentence echoed louder than the Adhan he had heard. He had cleaned his body hundreds of times in life, but never thought about cleaning his heart. He had carried so much anger, so much grief from the war that had taken everything from him. He had never known peace because he never knew how to release the pain. That night, he couldn't sleep. Not because he was afraid, but because he was alive in a way he hadn't felt for years. The quietness of the mosque, the sincerity of the people, the meaning behind every action, it was nothing like what he expected. He had always been told that faith was blind, but what he was seeing was the opposite. These people prayed with their hearts open, with tears in their eyes, and peace on their faces. For the first time, he prayed, not with words, not with rituals, but with feelings. He didn't know what to say or how to say it, but he closed his eyes and whispered from the depths of his broken heart, "Thank you for not leaving me behind." And in that moment, he didn't feel like a stranger anymore. He felt like someone who was being guided home. The next morning, the desert sun rose again, but this time everything looked different. The same barren land that once felt lifeless now seemed filled with quiet beauty. For the man who had wandered lost and hopeless, something had shifted within. The stillness that used to feel like loneliness now felt like peace. The call to prayer sounded again, this time softer, but somehow more powerful. It no longer felt like just a sound. It felt like a reminder that even in the middle of nowhere, someone was listening. Someone knew he existed, and someone had led him here for a reason. He watched as the men lined up once again in prayer. There was no show, no performance, just sincerity. One of them placed a small prayer mat beside him and gestured kindly, inviting him to join. He hesitated for a moment. He wasn't a Muslim. He didn't know what to do, but something within him told him that this moment wasn't about knowing. It was about feeling. So he stepped forward. He stood beside them, mimicking their motions, listening to their voices, and letting the rhythm carry him. He didn't know the meanings of the words being recited, but they didn't feel strange anymore. They felt like a song from a place his soul remembered, but his mind had forgotten. With every bow, every prostration, it was as if he was lowering his ego and raising his spirit. He wasn't sure if what he was doing was right, but it felt real. And in that realness, he found something he never thought he would. He found peace. After the prayer, one of the men gently explained some of the meanings behind the words. "We say them in Arabic," he said, "not to exclude others, but because they connect every Muslim around the world in one unified voice. It's not about language, it's about the heart behind the words." That answer struck him deeply. For a man who had always been taught to fear differences, this unity was eye-opening. By the time he left that mosque, he wasn't just physically refreshed, he was spiritually awakened. The desert hadn't just been the place where he got lost. It had become the place where he began to find himself. As he continued his journey through the desert, something inside him felt permanently altered. Just a day ago, he was overwhelmed by grief, lost in the shadows of his past with no direction or hope. Now he walked with a sense of calm he couldn't explain. Every step felt lighter, not because the journey had become easier, but because his heart no longer carried the same weight. Just a day away, the sound of the Adhan still echoed in his mind, not just as a call to prayer, but as a call to purpose, to meaning, to connection. And he remembered the kindness of the people in the mosque, the way they looked at him, not with suspicion, but with sincerity. There was no judgment in their eyes, only warmth. One of them had even told him, "You are always welcome here." That one sentence healed 1,000 wounds. For a man who had lost everything, family, friends, even his belief in humanity, That welcome meant the world. He started reading more about Islam, not because someone forced him, but because his heart was curious. He wanted to understand the source of that peace he felt. The more he read, the more he realized that Islam wasn't just a religion, it was a way of life, rooted in compassion, mercy, and justice. It wasn't about rituals alone. It was about living with purpose and humility. It was about seeing others as reflections of yourself and treating every soul with dignity. What touched him most was the concept of intention. In Islam, even the smallest act, like offering water to someone, held deep meaning when done with sincerity. He reflected on how a stranger had given him water in the mosque, with no questions asked. That one act of kindness became the seed that planted a forest of healing in his heart. By the time he reached the edge of the desert, he wasn't the same man anymore. His past still existed, but it no longer controlled him. Pain still visited him, but it no longer defeated him. And for the first time in years, he wasn't running from life. He was walking toward it, guided by a peace he had only just begun to understand. As the days passed, his journey became more than just a physical movement across land. It turned into a deep inner awakening. He began to seek out mosques in every town he passed, not because he had converted, but because there was something there that comforted him. The silence after prayer, the sound of the Quran, and the gentle greetings of peace be upon you began to feel like a balm for his soul. Every encounter with a Muslim reminded him that faith wasn't about grand displays. It was about quiet strength, unwavering hope, and unconditional kindness. He sat once with a scholar who offered him tea and asked him about his life. The man didn't try to preach, he just listened. And when the time felt right, he said something simple. Sometimes, the storm in your life is not meant to destroy you. It's meant to clear your path. Those words sank deep into his heart. He had spent so long blaming life, fate, and even God for the pain he carried, but now, for the first time, he saw that his suffering had led him to something he never would have found otherwise: truth, stillness, and light. The Quranic verses he heard in the mosques began to stay with him. Even though he couldn't understand the words, yet the tone, the rhythm, the emotion, they all stirred something within. One day, a young boy recited a verse, and without knowing what it meant, tears filled his eyes. Later, someone translated it for him, and it was about mercy, about not despairing from the mercy of God. It felt like it had been written just for him. He started journaling his experiences, trying to capture what words often failed to describe. With every page, he began to write not as someone observing a new world, but as someone who was slowly becoming part of it. He hadn't said the words yet. He hadn't declared a new faith. But deep down, he knew he was no longer who he used to be. By the end of his journey, he didn't just admire Islam, he respected it, understood it, and most of all, felt it. He had walked into the desert broken and alone. He walked out still carrying his scars, but now he carried them with strength. Because in the quiet call of the Adhan, in the smile of a stranger, in the words of the Quran, he had found what war and loss had taken away from him: peace. This is not just a story about a man who wandered into a desert and heard the Adhan. This is the story of a heart that was lost in pain, grief, and disbelief until it stumbled upon a moment of divine beauty. What he experienced in that quiet, distant mosque was not a coincidence. It was a calling. A gentle reminder that no matter how far you've fallen, there is always a way back. There is always light if you open your eyes and let it in. The truth is, he didn't come searching for faith. He came searching for peace. And in Islam, he found both. In the way Muslims welcomed him, in the sincerity of their prayer, in the humility of their actions, he discovered a path that didn't just offer answers, but healing. What touched him most wasn't the theology or debate. It was the kindness, the warmth, and the sense of unity that made him feel like he was no longer alone in the world. Faith isn't always found in books or speeches. Sometimes it's found in a small act of compassion. Sometimes it arrives in the call of prayer, echoing across a vast desert. For this man, it arrived quietly, but it stayed deeply. And maybe that's the most powerful kind of transformation. The one that doesn't happen loudly, but completely. The one that doesn't ask for proof, but gives peace. The one that doesn't erase your past, but helps you walk toward your future with purpose and clarity. To everyone watching this, thank you. Thank you for being part of a journey that reminds us how deeply connected we all are. Whether you believe, question, or simply seek, you are not alone. Sometimes the most unexpected moment can become your turning point. So keep your heart open, listen to the quiet moments, and remember, faith isn't just about finding God. It's also about finding yourself. Thank you for watching. If this story touched you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Someone out there may need to hear this today. Just like he needed to hear the Adhan that one unforgettable day in the desert.